What's your best fire me, I effing dare you moment from work? Story 1. At 17, I took a summer job at Pizza Hut, which was a transfer from my university town restaurant. After 5 weeks of hard work, I hadn't been paid yet, as my boss had wrongfully claimed that I gave him the wrong employee number. Knowing I wasn't a volunteer, I called him on New Year's Eve, the busiest night of the summer, and told him that I wouldn't be coming into work. He retaliated by threatening to fire me. Deciding that I deserved a fun New Year's, I didn't go to work. But I called the employment tribunal and told them of my situation. My boss was contacted, and he soon offered me my job back, and he was pleasant for the rest of the summer. Story 2. After finding out that my husband was in need of life-threatening surgery, I had to make a difficult decision. My boss was adamant that I couldn't leave early, but I stood my ground and let her know that I had plenty of sick time to take. And if she wanted to push, I'd use all of it in one go, leaving her with no one to do my job. Despite risking my job, I decided to go ahead and leave, and I gave her my doctor's note. Surprisingly, I was not only allowed to keep my job, but I was actually awarded for my performance that year. Story 3. A couple of years ago, I was stuck in a job that was draining every ounce of energy out of me. Despite my successful efforts in keeping the entire warehouse in running order, no pay raises or time off were given. The final insult was when the front of the house staff kept the bonus money for themselves, depriving the back of the house employees. When I found a new job, the interviews went well. However, the manager tried to blame me for the lack of bonus money, citing a list of tasks I had refused due to being overloaded. I gave my 2 weeks' notice, and the feeling of freedom was immense. Story 4. I worked at Radio Shack and had a tumultuous relationship with the district manager. He wanted me to use overly aggressive sales tactics, but I refused. I wanted to work smarter, not harder. After all, my strategy worked. I won the company-wide contest for best salesman out of 14,000 employees. Despite my success, the DM persisted in pushing his sales approach. I eventually stopped being so diplomatic and bluntly told him it was a bad idea. Story 5. As a speech therapist, I once worked at a place where the boss was an absolute scumbag. So much so that the entire rehab staff signed a letter demanding his removal. Eventually, he was forced out and I left. Imagine my surprise when I swung by the rehab gym and saw him sitting in my current boss's office. I was in shock, thinking he was interviewing for a job there. In a surge of bravery, I went to the boss at the time and told him if he got hired, I was walking out. She was visibly surprised and quickly let me know that he wasn't working there. It was my first time taking a stand and drawing a line in the sand. Story 6. For years, I've worked at one of the most respected restaurants in my beach town, and I'm the only server who never takes a smoke break. This summer, my employer implemented a new rule. If a server messed up an order, they would be responsible for the cost of the food. I figured I'd had nothing to worry about since I'm a great server. But one day, I accidentally ordered a cherry-glazed burger instead of a cherry-glazed steak. After I corrected the order, I told my manager that I knew the rule was illegal. I decided to stand up for my rights as a worker, so I researched the federal and state laws and told my manager that I would never work there again if they tried to deduct money from my tips. Fortunately, I haven't had a problem with the order since then. Story 7. I was already feeling ill when I showed up to work at the restaurant, but I knew my managers were so strict that if I called in sick, they'd be livid. I arrived at 8 a.m., and by 9 a.m., I was certain I wouldn't be able to make it through the rest of the day. Nonetheless, they forced me to stay. By 9:30, I was pre-bussing my tables, and the sight of the leftover food was too much for me, so I quickly ran to the dishwashing area and vomited in the trash can. I was lucky that a coworker had witnessed this and was willing to vouch for me when I had to tell my manager I was leaving for the doctor. He warned me that if I left for the day, I'd be fired, but I boldly responded that there was human waste in the kitchen trash can and that it was recorded on camera, and so I decided to leave anyway. To my surprise, when I returned to work a few days later, I hadn't heard a word about it. I eventually quit a few weeks later for a job at a much higher-scale restaurant. Story 8. After reluctantly giving my 2 weeks' notice at an incredibly understaffed job, I was taken ill just 6 days later. I called around to see if anyone could fill in, but to no avail. When I attempted to call out that morning, my horrible manager attempted to persuade me to come into work despite me being violently ill. I hesitantly agreed to call back later to check if I was feeling well enough to come in, but when I did, I was still too ill. My manager then proceeded to berate me in front of customers, leaving me flabbergasted. When I asked what he expected me to do about the shift needing to be covered, I was met with further aggression. I had done all that I was obliged to do, so I hung up and switched off my phone, feeling utterly humiliated. Story 9. When I was working at a private medical college in Punjab, India, I was asked to falsify patient admissions to get increased grants from the government. Knowing that it was wrong, I refused. They threatened to fire me as I was the only resident specializing in orthopedics. To my surprise, the government conducted a surprise medical inspection. They offered me 3 times my monthly pay if I attended the one-day inspection. Knowing that I had the upper hand, I asked for 5 times the amount and they agreed. At the last moment, I backed out, leaving them in a tough spot as they now had an insufficient number of residents and no admissions in orthopedics until the next inspection. Story 10. After pleading my case with my manager, I was informed that my boss wasn't keen on granting me a week off in August for my nuptials. I stayed firm and told them that my wedding was more important than back-to-school sales, a statement that I was determined to stand by. Despite my persistence, they refused to schedule me any more shifts, and I eventually lost access to the company website. Story 11. After working in a bar during my undergrad, I had to take a 4-week field course in order to graduate. Even though I gave them plenty of notice, they still started giving me a hard time when the time came to leave. They kept asking why I couldn't stay and accusing me of not caring about the bar. Understandably, I had to take the class and so I left. But when I returned, they never scheduled me again. Even though I was disappointed, I wasn't too surprised considering the frosty atmosphere of the bar. Story 12. After I had been working in the kitchen for only 6 months, I quickly learned how to do every job there, aside from one. When I asked for a raise for learning all the tasks, the head chef refused, so I told him that I could easily find a new kitchen since I was one of the best employees. He finally conceded and gave me a raise, but it wasn't enough. I demanded another raise, and when he refused, I told him that I would find another job. Sure enough, I found a job the very next day and put in my 2 weeks. To my surprise, I made more money in the new kitchen than anyone else besides the banquet chef and the head chef. That's how I managed to get 3 raises in 1 month. Story 13. As a teenager, I worked at Burger King when the assistant manager asked me to clean the restrooms. I was apprehensive, but I had a good attitude and was prepared to do my job. But when I stepped into the men's room, I was taken aback by the sight of the complete disaster I had encountered. Someone had left a huge mess with smeared fecal matter on the walls, sink, floor, and even outside of the toilet. The toilet was clogged and overflowing with wet toilet paper. I couldn't believe my eyes. I refused to clean it, and the assistant manager had to get a mop and clean it herself. Story 14. After years of devoted service, I'm well known and highly valued by the clients of our business. My expertise is so great that I'm the go-to person for training new recruits, many of whom may stay with us for up to 12 months before moving on. Recently, I was threatened with dismissal after taking an unscheduled day off to have a beer. I had agreed to do extra work, but hadn't seen the changes to my work schedule, so I was blamed for not attending. Refusing to be intimidated, I bravely challenged my employer to fire me, confident that the business would not be able to survive without me. Story 15. On the night of my 22nd birthday, while I was working at a bookstore in the King of Prussia Mall, I experienced one of the most memorable moments of my life. Unfortunately, it was made even more memorable because my college girlfriend of 4 years had broken up with me earlier that evening. It was around 7-8 p.m. and the store was bustling with customers. Suddenly, an awful smell permeated the air. I saw my manager at the other register and he smelled it too. But we both kept working, trying to get through the long line quickly. But then a woman came up to me, her face red from laughing in shock and embarrassment. She told me that one of our customers had gone down an aisle only to find a small girl taking a crap on the floor. Stunned, I glanced over at the manager and said, "Dave, you can go ahead and fire me, but I'm not cleaning that up."